Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rogers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rogers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live for October the 29th. I wish I could say it was Cocktober the 29th, but it's not, because the Gamecocks, well, we're just a sad bunch of Gamecocks, and the Gamecocks are struggling after snatching defeat from the jaws of victory against Alabama. You had a 22-14 lead in the fourth quarter. I have thoughts. We'll get into those with Alex Jones and Lulu Kesin, South Carolina, on the road, back-to-back games against number 7 Ole Miss, who, by the way, is averaging almost 500 yards a game and 38 points per game. And South Carolina, historically, poor offense. I'll dive into some statistics, and I'll just let you know in advance, spoiler alert, South Carolina's offense has not been this porous and awful since 1999. And they didn't have a 5-star left tackle, a 4-star right tackle, a 4-star right guard, a 5-star wide receiver in Nick Harbor, who can take the top off of any defense that they rarely utilize. And they didn't have maybe the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft at quarterback in Lenore Sellers, who Mike Shula has completely ruined. His decisiveness, his ability to run and get out of the pocket for the most part, unless he's running for his life. You can go down the list of just poor offensive coaching hires by Shane Beamer. And South Carolina's in this position because of a lot of self-inflicted wounds and a head coach after 4.5 years who still cannot manage his emotions. Okay, South Carolina trailed 14-6 at the half. They hit Nick Harbor, okay, which I give credit. I think that may be the first time after a turnover South Carolina's taken a deep shot since the head ball coach was roaming the sidelines. And maybe he called that play because he was on the sidelines. Spurrier, after a sudden change, every time it was going to be, he was taking a deep shot. They took the top off with Nick Harbor. Lenore Sellers underthrew him. He still caught it and scored a touchdown to make it 14-12. And then, and we'll get into this with Alex Jones, who will be joining in just a couple of minutes. You kicked the point You make it 14-13. You don't chase the points. And you damn sure don't call a timeout. Burn a timeout that you know you're going to need desperately because you can't score points. You're good for 2 touchdowns a game. That's what they got, and both were on a short field. A 54-yard touchdown pass, one play, and then after Alabama muffs a punt, you get a 30-yard line, and you go 30 yards for a touchdown. But you don't chase the points there. You kick it, you make it 14-13. Let's go ahead and go to the capital city and bring in the pride of Hampton County and thebigspur.com, Alex Jones. And so, Alex, welcome in, brother. How you doing?
Doing good. Good to be back with you.
Man, it's good to be back. And so let me just start by saying the last 3 weeks have not been good for me. Okay. 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday, I had to have emergency dental surgery. Okay. Then the following week, my air conditioner went out. My allergies were so bad, I had to go to a hotel. The Wi-Fi was ass. Okay. And then I come back last week, and because of the allergies and the drainage, the congestion piles up in my chest, and I have an upper respiratory infection. I'm coughing. I'm sick. And so we've been off the air for 3 weeks, but we're back, and I'm bringing the heat this morning, Alex, because I'm calling out Mike Shula. I'm calling out Shane Beamer. Okay, you were in the press box. South Carolina stops Alabama on downs to start the third quarter. It's 14-6. You know, the head ball coach was on the sidelines. Maybe he called that play because I think that's the first time after a sudden change I've seen South Carolina take a deep shot on the first play after a sudden change of possession since 2014. Okay.
Yeah.
So you take the deep shot, you hit Nick Harbor, and then you got a special teams coordinator in Joe DeCamillis who spent over 30 years in the National Football League. He knows you go for one there. You kick it. You don't chase points that early in the ball game because you can't score that many points. You don't chase the points until you have to. You also have an offensive coordinator who spent over 20 years in the National Football League that knows you kick it. Instead, there's confusion. Shane Beamer, his emotions always get the best of him. He's got to go for 2 because he can't help himself. Well, you can't get the playoff, so you burn the timeout, which is egregious. Number 2. Number 1 is going for 2. Why not just take the delay of game and kick the damn thing?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too when that was going on. But Shane Beamer kind of talked about it after the game, and it did make a little bit of sense where he said, if he lets it go, if you let it go, then you worry about, you take a bad snap all of a sudden because you're trying to rush the snap. But to your point, number 1, I mean, I thought it was a little bit early to start chasing points in that game. I mean, you had a lot of momentum. Your defense was playing pretty well up to that point. Like, it just felt a little bit early. And then, I mean, as we saw at the end of that game, that 1 point really kind of mattered, or I guess 2 points really kind of mattered at the end of that game.
Well, that's right. Because if you kick that extra point, it's 14-13.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you make a 47-yard field goal, then you get the muffed punt, you go in. It would have been 23-14. Alabama scores with 2 minutes and 16 seconds to go. It would have been 23-20. They would not have gone for 2. They would have kicked it to make it 23-21. And then they're faced with the dilemma. Do we onside kick or do we kick it deep? We use one timeout before the 2-minute timeout. Then we use the 2-minute timeout. Then we still have 2 more timeouts. We stop them. Well, South Carolina, really, all they need is one timeout after the 2-minute timeout to run out the clock. And what is the 2-minute offense? Run up the middle? That's worked all year, hadn't it? No. Phase on 1 yard. It goes to 2 minutes. Then you have a free play, and Lenora Sellers misses a wide open Brady Hunt at midfield. That would have been a huge play in a tie game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because he may have run 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 yards with it. You would have been in Alabama territory with 2 timeouts. And so you get the offside, so then it's 2nd and 4. So instead of being creative, instead of getting Lenora Sellers outside the pocket, you just run a quarterback draw up the middle, because that hadn't really worked since Virginia Tech on the first drive of the season. And credit Alabama. Sellers had the ball securely. It's not like he was carrying it like a loaf of bread. And they just ripped it out, just under half a second before his knee hit the ground. And, disappointingly, you don't stop them. I thought they were kind of reckless with the ball because they could have turned that thing over.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that. But, let's credit Clayton White and the defense. Going into the fourth quarter, in the first quarter, Alabama, no first downs, 6 plays for 11 yards, and they have 7 points because Rasul Faison can't catch a swing pass. All that time, all that energy, all that effort for him to basically still be the second best back on the team, and they playing him over Matt Fuller anyway. And Alabama gets a defensive touchdown, and really that's the difference in the game, was a giveaway score. Why is Matt Fuller still not playing more?
Yeah, since that LSU game when he had that long touchdown run, he's definitely one of the top 2 running backs I think should be in the rotation. And I think there's a strong argument he should be number 1, just because when you watch him run, he's a hard runner. He's always falling forward. And, South Carolina's going to have some issues in the run game like they've had this year. Falling forward to get an extra 1 or 2 yards to help keep you ahead of the change is a big thing. So, but back to your point on the defense. So, going into that game, kind of the talk was, can South Carolina be able to keep up with this Alabama offense, just because you were worried about, some of the things with Ryan Williams and, Jeremy Bernard and Horton and those guys on the perimeter. Plus, Todd Simpson's having a really good year. You're starting to wonder, can South kind of hold them off long enough? And, I thought the defense played a really good game. They, adjusted pretty well throughout the game. And, it was the secondary just had a really nice performance overall. And then, really up front, I think on the defensive line, they had their best performance too. Nick Barrett and Monkel Goodwin, those guys were all over the field the whole game. And, I thought, both of those guys, and Shane Beamer kind of talked about this after the game too, about how both of those guys had some of their best performances too. So, I thought overall the defense did exactly what they had to do. You just had to give Alabama credit on that last drive. They just kind of did what they needed to do and made the big plays when you had to. And that's what, really good offenses and really good teams do. And I thought the 2-point conversion play that Alabama ran, I thought was just an excellent play call, and one that's really hard to stop. And then, like I said, they just made plays at the end of the game to keep that thing going and ultimately get a win. But offensively, I think defensively, there's a lot of talk about just that last play with DQ Smith and kind of letting them score. But I think at the end of the day, it's one of those where, as we're sitting here today on Wednesday, we're probably sitting here talking about the same outcome, whichever decision they make on that play.
All right. I'm having some audio difficulties here. Hopefully we'll get back up in a second. But, I mean, I just there we go. Yeah. I just did not understand why Matt Fuller is not playing more. I mean, look, Sean Elliott has done a great job with the offensive line, but once again, just like we saw in 2022, Shane Beamer's second year, he waited until after the 10th game of the season to sit down and have a come to Jesus meeting with his offensive coordinator and cut down the playbook. Okay, this year he waits until late in the season again to say, hey, let's cut down on the plays and essentially say, hey, you need to start taking advantage of Sean Elliott and Mike Furry and everybody else in this offensive room. So they did have some new run plays, but still, like the head ball coach would say, well, Todd, you have to kick a bunch of little field goals in the first half. That usually comes back to haunt you. And South Carolina has to kick a 24-yard field goal. Then they have to kick a 34-yard field goal. And honestly, I don't understand why this is the worst South Carolina offense statistically since 1999, when Lou Holtz had a different offensive line every week and went through 5 different quarterbacks. Okay. And you've got Lenora Sellers. South Carolina is the only team in the Southeastern Conference to average less than 300 yards per game. Their offense is dead last in total offense and number 127 out of 136 in FBS football. Okay, their rushing offense is 15th in the SEC, barely over 100 yards per game. Number 121 in the country. Their scoring offense, 20.4 points per game, which is number 114 in the nation. Third down offense, just less than 34% conversions, 119th. Number of first downs per game, 119th. Time of possession, 119th. Penalties, tied for number 124 in the country. And most of those penalties have been on the offense because of just a series of really poor offensive hires ever since Mike Bobo, Will Friend, and Des Kitchings left the staff. I got to hand it to Clayton White's defense. Those guys played inspired. They played their ass off. I thought Nick Barrett had, I mean, he was the best defensive player on the field. He made the most impact. They still hold Dylan Stewart every play. I think they called it once, maybe twice. And I want to get your thoughts on how historically bad this offense is, and then also that ticky-tack holding call on Tree Babalade that cost South Carolina. Call it out. That's protecting the brand.
Yeah, I kind of, on that play, especially with what you mentioned with South Carolina's red zone struggles, they needed that play to go through because that was just that whole drive. There were just so many penalties, really, on both teams that the ball just kept moving back and forth. But South Carolina needed that, and I kind of thought that was kind of ticky tacky. It was very similar to the fake field goal a few years ago versus Alabama. It was very similar type of holding with the way the play design and all that. But with the offense, I think a lot of it's just been, it was obviously the offensive line struggles have played a huge part in that. And, it's not just those guys. They've had some other issues there too. But, I thought one thing in the Alabama game that you saw that was for, I guess, a positive, but then also what you haven't seen for the whole year was North Sellers kind of looked like, from a run standpoint, looked like who he was last year towards the back half of that season. And you haven't seen that a whole lot through this first part of the season. And I think a lot, I don't know what a whole lot of that is. I don't know if they just don't want him to run the ball as much. Obviously, Mike Shula kind of mentioned in a press conference last week about how, a few games ago, Norris ran the ball 22 times and, he didn't know if that was the best thing for him. But, I think when you look at the Sellers, that's kind of what he's really best at, those kind of dirty run type of plays. He could just make things happen. You see that constantly. And you saw that against Alabama, him doing some of that. And you kind of just wonder where that's been through the first part of the season. But, not being able to run the ball, staying behind the chains. And then when you stay behind the chains, you get into these obvious passing downs, which early on the season, that offensive line just couldn't protect Sellers, and these teams are just coming after him. And so, I think, you got some weapons on the perimeter, like Nick Harbor. You see he's kind of had those flashes. Some of those young receivers, I thought Jaden Sellers had a really good day. But then, you're just not seeing, sometimes just not having time to get the ball out there to those guys. I think you do have to give some credit to Sean Elliott just because I think that line has improved through 2 games. You're starting to see his DNA on some of those guys. I thought they improved in that Alabama game, but it's just they got to find a way to. When you go up against these next 2 teams, against Ole Miss and Texas A&M, kind of same thing we were talking about with Alabama. These teams can score a lot of points, and if your offense has going to have to play keep up, and I'm just not sure if we haven't seen South Carolina be able to do that so far from putting the points on the board standpoint.
No doubt about it, Alex. Points have been a premium all year. They will continue to be a premium all year. And so, it's a different game, but it's the same story as last year. You have a second half turnover by Lenore Sellers, and you missed a field goal. That if you make it, you probably win the game. But South Carolina can't finish the deal. They blow another fourth quarter lead in the SEC. I can't really fault the defense. The defense, I thought, just looked gassed the last and deflated after the last series on the Lenore Sellers turnover. And with Alabama's field goal kicker never making a walk-off, I'm just not so sure I would have let him score. It's not like he's the guy from Virginia Tech or an All-American kicker. I get it, but with 20-something seconds to go, you're not going the length of the field. You're just not.
Yeah, I think it's pretty likely that, with either outcome or with either decision on that play, we're sitting here talking about the same outcome just because there was a short field goal. And then also to your point, with that much time on the clock, the 34 seconds or whatever it was, I don't think we've seen South Carolina's offense be able to drive the field like that in that short amount of time. So I think there are other decisions on that in that game to kind of talk about that one. I think it's same outcome either way because you have to expect. I know college kickers, you never know these days, but you have to just expect the odds are he's going to make that field goal.
I agree. I still go back to the decision to go for 2 and then the 2-minute offense. I don't understand. You ran it 2 out of 3 plays after you take possession, and both runs were right up the middle. into the heart of the Alabama defense. And it just seems like Shula, after he gets off script, the plays are just not creative. They're predictable and not very effective.
Yeah, it does feel like there's been too many times this season where some of the plays either on their opening script or in those kind of first 10, 15, 20 plays or after those first few drives, plays that work, you don't see them again. Like it feels like they get away from stuff way too early. And I think on that last drive, the 2-minute drive that you're talking about, like I think you wanted to see like go out there and let Norris just kind of be Norris and kind of spread the field out, let those guys run those routes, maybe even those longer type of routes, kind of open the field up for Sellers. But again, like I think just offensively, it's just sometimes they just get away from things way too early. Like some of those tight end dump off passes that worked so well that you just don't see them enough.
Yeah, I mean, there were no dump offs to the tight end, and then Mo Brown gets hurt, and I can't remember if I don't think Jordan Dingle had a catch, and it seems like in a late game offense, we're throwing it short of the chains to Brady Hunt, who's getting tackled. And all right, so looking ahead, South Carolina's 3-5. You have a new athletic director. You have back-to-back road games against top 7 opponents. At number 7, Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin, who gets my vote for SEC Coach of the Year simply because he lost a first-round quarterback, Jackson Dart, who's going to lead the Giants to the playoffs. You lost a ton of talent off your defense, and you're better this year. Shane Beamer said it. So last year, South Carolina and Ole Miss had the same record. Both were college football playoff contenders. But South Carolina's not better this year. They're not even as good. And so Shane Beamer and Lane Kiffin are the same age. Why is Ole Miss so much better than South Carolina? They can't have that much more money. And to me, that's the problem here, because you go to Ole Miss, you lose. You go to Texas A&M, you're going to get bullied in that game. Tip of the hat to Mike Elko. I called him Texas 8-5 until they showed me. He's shown me. Unless they lose out, they're not going to be Texas 8-5. They're probably going to get a bye in the college football playoff. They could win the SEC championship. South Carolina is going to be a double-digit underdog in both of those games. And barring a major upset, Shane Beamer is going to be looking at 3-7, which will be his second losing season the last 3 years. It's take one step forward and 2 steps back. 2022, you turn it around. You beat Tennessee and Clemson. You're 8-4. You lose the bowl game. You're 8-5. Then you hire Dow Loggins, and Lonnie Teasley whiffs on Sidney Fugar, Jackson Hayes, and whoever else he brought in from the transfer portal. You go 5-7. Spencer Rattler goes to the NFL as a rookie, as a second-year guy. He's playing as a starting quarterback. Then the last half of last season, Dow Loggins figures out the cheat code. He unlocks Lenore Sellers' ability, and Rocket Sanders, Joshua Simon, Mazeo Bennett, and others make plays. You go 9-3. You bring in Shula, and he talks about Lenore Sellers staying in the pocket. The bowl game, that's what he did. They lost. Then this year, historically awful, abysmal offense with a guy that's a Heisman candidate and could be the first or second quarterback drafted. If Shane Beamer is 3-7, how hot is his seat? And could Jeremiah Donati move on from Shane Beamer? Because we're seeing it in the SEC. They're not waiting around. Okay. Billy Napier, fired. Sam Pittman, fired. Brian Kelly, fired. Hugh Freeze, probably going to be out at Auburn. Where's Shane Beamer on the hot seat list?
Yeah, I just don't think, this is completely my opinion. Like, I don't think anything will happen this season. I don't know if I see that happening. But that does that pressure next season, you have to imagine, or obviously that pressure next season going into next year, like, you're gonna have to figure out some of these things with the offense. Because it's just they figured, like you mentioned, they figured some things out to the back half of that season last year with Norris and Dow Loggins, but just kind of overall it's just been inconsistent. But they've got to figure some things out there, and really in all facets. And then you got to wonder what the portal is going to look like too, just from both sides of it. Like, what South going to be able to land. They've done a pretty good job in retention, even that year where they struggled 2 years ago. They did a decent job in retention where they kept what they wanted to keep. But you have to imagine there's going to be a lot of teams coming after some of South Carolina's best players. So retention is going to be huge. And it's, obviously, it's going to be a lot of pressure on the South Carolina program and Shane Beamer going into next season. Just in my opinion, that he's back next season, there's going to be a lot of pressure there.
But you have that losing season, you go 4-8. Retention's going to be hard. Mm-hmm. Holding on to your recruiting class is going to be hard. And do we really trust Shane Beamer to improve the staff? Do we really expect him to finally hire the right offensive coordinator? And who's even coming with him coming off a 4-8 season in all likelihood? 5-7 best case scenario. The only feather in his cap would be if he makes it to the last game, which I'm not so sure he does. I just don't know who he hires, and do you trust him to make the right hired offensive coordinator? He's whiffed essentially 2.5 times.
Yeah, and it's going to be like what type of get into that offensive coordinator hire. What type of style is it going to be? It's going to be kind of this pro stylish type of style that they've tried to run here, or they're going to try to run more like these you see like these Ole Miss types of offenses, or just kind of these air it out types of offenses. Like, that's going to be. It's going to be interesting to see how that turns out too. Just because I think let's say that Norris is back next year. Like, I think you have to imagine you want to get him more into that kind of spread it out type of open the field up type of offense too. So what can he land from there too? It's going to be a question.
All right, so recruiting the last few weekends, South Carolina has hosted Julian Walker on an official visit, which I think was his third game. That was the Oklahoma game. Then he was back for the Alabama game. That's his fourth game, I think, this season, maybe third. Okay, Greenville defensive lineman, a late riser, a guy who's a basketball player until this year, Franklin Whitley, 6'7", 265. He's been to like 3 or 4 games. He made an official visit that weekend of the 17th as well. And then this past weekend, the number 3 player in the class of 2026, the number 1 defensive end in the country, 5-star edge rusher, Zion Ely from St. Francis in Baltimore, Maryland. He made an official visit. What's the expectation with these guys when you're staring a losing record right in the face?
Yeah, that's not only with these guys, but that's going to be the question with the current commits too. Like, how well can they keep the current commits together? And they did a pretty good job of that 2 years ago when things weren't going well. So I'm interested to see how that turns out this year too. But with those guys specifically, like with Julian Walker, like obviously he's got as we've talked about plenty of times, got the staff connections with his dad being on staff. And, I think it could be one of those where you follow the visits with him because he's been, as you mentioned, South Carolina multiple times, and still keep an eye on Michigan just because that's obviously still where he's committed. And, I think he's supposed to be back in Ann Arbor for the Ohio State game. So they're going to have to be one to watch. I'm sure there's going to be a lot from there that they're going to be selling there too. And with Franklin Whitley, like that could easily be one that comes down to a South Carolina Alabama battle. And he was obviously been in town the last few weeks to watch South Carolina. So still feel good about their chances. You just have to hope that just, with the way the season's going, that you can hold on to those guys and hold on to some of the momentum. And then with Zion Ely, like, it was good. I think for South Carolina, it's going to be, obviously with him, it's going to be really quiet around him just because there's not a whole lot of talking going on from his side of things and in his camp. But, I think with Zion Ely, he's going to kind of hope that, you see what happens with Maryland this year, see what it goes down there with there, because obviously they're trying to, I think it's a big year for Mike Locksley there. And so you will see, but South Carolina's definitely in the race there. But, I think it could end up, Mike Locksley is still around there, could end up being a tough pull from Maryland.
All right. So, I mean, LSU and Auburn were in heavy pursuit of Landon Duckworth. There could be changes likely at both of those places. How strong do you think that commitment is?
I mean, there hasn't been any signs right now that it isn't strong. I mean, he made the trip back this past weekend. And I think, with this recruiting class right now, just these next few weeks, just continue to watch it just because, as things could go the way they could go, you will see. But, I mean, with a lot of these commits, like they've been in town and for a lot of these games here recently. And not only a lot in town a lot, but most of them have been in town to see games. So hasn't been any signs with any of these guys. Obviously, they lost Jamel House a few weeks ago. And but I think that's but with the rest of these guys, like kind of continue to watch about it. With any of all these guys, you still hear that still things are still strong there.
So, Alex, are there any other guys that South Carolina maybe hasn't offered, or I know there was mentioned that there was another maybe unofficial or official visitor that is kind of kept under the radar that's committed somewhere else. Could that have been maybe an in-state guy from near the state line, that I-77 corridor there?
I don't know, but obviously I know who you're trying to get at there. I think from a flip standpoint, like I think a lot of people have kind of had their eye on Samari Matthews from Texas. Like he's been, or Samari Matthews, who's committed to Texas, who's from Charlotte. He's been pretty solid with Texas. Things go there, and then with Texas A&M having a really good season, and then with Tamarian Watkins, the safety from Northwestern. I think it's just one of those kind of just keep watching to see what happens there. But kind of the guys that we've talked about from a flip standpoint, that's kind of who right now kind of keeping an eye on just to see. With Julian Walker, Zion Ely, kind of what happens there. Then you still got Franklin Whitley that you're trying to round out that class with.
All right, Alex Jones from the Big Spur. I can't thank you enough, brother. Appreciate all you do. Appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. Be well, and enjoy the Grove this weekend. I have a feeling that'll be the food in the press box, because I have a feeling that may be the only thing enjoyable. Hopefully you have an enjoyable flight both ways.
Well, I appreciate it. I always enjoy being on, and glad to see you're back and feeling better.
All right, Alex Jones, we'll catch up down the road, brother. All right, so we go from Alex Jones to Lulu Kesin, formerly of The Ringer, now the USA Today Network, and doing great work at the Greenville News, covering all things Gamecocks, particularly football and women's basketball. Lulu, how have you been? How are things going? Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Sorry, I was a couple minutes late. I was having issues with my technology. I'm good. I'm very busy, very tired, but good overall. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in and let's talk about this season. South Carolina's 3-5. Obviously, there were high expectations for this season. South Carolina was 9-3. They were on the cusp of the college football playoff. Last year, they finished the regular season with 6 straight wins. They defeated 3 ranked opponents. They beat Clemson for the second time in 3 years. They beat Texas A&M. They beat Missouri in there as well. A lot of good wins. Close in some others against Alabama. And so there were high expectations. You return Lenora Sellers. You return both your offensive tackles. You returned a 5-star and Nick Harbor, and there was reason to believe with Dylan Stewart and Lenora Sellers in every game, you may have the best offensive and defensive player on the field. And the defense has been pretty good, and they were damn good against Alabama until they got gassed at the very end. But Lulu, this offense, and I know you did a big story in the Greenville News. Go and check that out, everybody, just about how historically bad South Carolina's offense has been. I ran through the statistics earlier with Alex. We won't get into it except to say South Carolina is 127th in the nation in total offense. They're the only, and dead last in the SEC, they're the only offense in the SEC averaging under 300 yards per game, and scoring offense 20 points per game. That's just not going to win in today's college football, and that's why they're 3-5. And it also exacerbates it when you make just brain dead coaching decisions. And Shane Beamer, now more than 4.5 years into his tenure, has still not learned how to control his emotions, because you get that touchdown in the third quarter to make it 14-12. Your special teams coordinator spent over 30 plus years in the National Football League. Your offensive coordinator, 20 plus years in the National Football League. They both know you kick it. You do not chase points that early in the game. I don't care what Shane Beamer says. There's no reason. And then on top of that, to burn a timeout instead of just taking the delay of game and kicking it, that was a game-changing decision. Because if you kick it there, it's 23-14. It's a 2-possession lead in the fourth quarter. And when Alabama scores with 2 minutes and 16 seconds to go, they're kicking the point. It's going to be 23-21. And then they're faced with the decision of onside kicking or kicking it deep and using all their timeouts to stop you. And instead, it's tied, and I don't even know what South Carolina's 2-minute offense is, because you run it up the middle, you take it the 2-minute timeout, then you come out, you did throw it, you get Alabama offsides, and Lenoris unfortunately missed Brady Hunt wide open at midfield. You're probably in Alabama territory. But then to run the quarterback draw up the middle, I mean, yes, I want the ball in Lenora Sellers' hands, but I don't want him running up the middle because they haven't worked all season long. I mean, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's just sort of the story of this season. It did feel like last year, every loss they had, they were inching closer and closer towards something, where this year it feels sort of like just repeated mistakes, or even like when one problem is fixed, another one comes up. And I mean, this may be a hot take. Like for example, I was impressed with the offensive line against Alabama. For the most part, Sellers had time to throw, and I think the offense looked good at times. I mean, obviously it's a low bar, but I'd argue the offense looked probably the best it had since maybe like game 1 against Alabama, just because they were able to at least look like they found some rhythm, not necessarily success every drive, but rhythm. And it also helps when your defense is playing out of your mind, out of their mind like they were. But it just sort of seems like every time a problem is addressed with this team, a new one comes up. And I think obviously there's fingers to point at the play calling. I think the lack of creativity there, but it's seemingly a little bit like there's some execution stuff as well coming down. And I'm not going to sit here and say like the players are as much to blame as the coaches, because one, I don't know that inner dynamic. Like I can't sit here and watch enough film to say that with certainty, but it's absolutely a disappointing performance from the offense overall. And I mean, hindsight's 2020. I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, I predicted South Carolina wasn't going to be as good this year. Like I believe that they would go like 9-3. I had belief, but also I recognize like they lost a large amount of leaders. And I think leadership is where they might be really suffering right now. And I think that something which I'll die on the hill, like I think it's good about Shane, is that he doesn't force players to be someone they're not. And that's great when you don't have to force your quarterback to be a vocal leader if he's not. But why he was able to still kind of like have that success last year is that he had other vocal leaders around him. And I think that South Carolina is just now starting to have those. And that's tough when you all of a sudden kind of grow into your voice week 8, week 9, week 10, instead of maybe having that from the get-go like they had with Demetrius Knight, Kyle Kennard, things like that. And I also think like, I personally, isn't really talked about a ton. Like, I think Brian Thomas Jr. is doing a really nice job opposite Dylan Stewart. And I was really impressed with him last year, really impressed with him in the Citrus Bowl. And I think that, like, having Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart last year, like, the offensive line was going to have to focus more on one or the other. Like, Will Campbell had to pick between, like, am I going to have to deal with Dylan Stewart today, or am I going to have to deal with Kyle Kennard? I think that this year, it's pretty easy to assume or look at like, oh, Dylan's taken steps back or he hasn't been much of an impact. But it's like teams aren't scouting for Brian Thomas Jr. yet, even though he has more sacks. So I think that Dylan's he's held every other play. It's a double team, things like that. The defense overall is fine, but I think that the star power and maybe why that hasn't produced is like, one, teams are more prepared for what Lenoris can do this year. And that's not me making excuses by any means, but he's a hard player to kind of judge. Like I haven't really felt like I have a solid opinion on Lenoris in 2025. And that's not to say I don't think he's good. I just mean in terms of like, okay, every other quarterback in America, a win and a loss is a QB stat. So Lenoris can't be excused from that. But also, like, you look at these games and they're really not on him most of the time. It's tricky. I think if South Carolina takes even the slightest step back this week in what they can control, it's sort of like, okay, hands up, like that's the season. But I think that even though it's way too late, it's still never too late to win any games that they can. I'm not going to sit here and predict that they'll win, 3 of the last 4 or anything like that, but they got to start somewhere right now. And they kind of got to look at it as it's a 0-0 season. We played a great game against Alabama. Let's go win a game.
Well, that'd be pretty good if you were playing a struggling Oklahoma team on the road like you were last year.
Absolutely, yeah.
But instead, you're playing at Ole Miss and an offense and a team which is better than they were last year, according to Shane Beamer.
Right.
Okay, but they had the same 9-3 record. They lost a ton of players off of their defense, the National Football League, just like South Carolina did. But yet, they're better this year, and South Carolina is worse. And you have a coach in Lane Kiffin who Shane Beamer said it, we're the same age. But Ole Miss is much better than last year, and South Carolina is much worse than last year. And I look at Shane Beamer's poor track record of offensive coaches. You know, you replace Mike Bobo, who you could have kept if you were willing to pay him and give him a 3-year contract, with Marcus Satterfield, who I thought was the worst offensive coordinator in school history until Mike Shula came along. Dow Loggins, okay, because you kept Lonnie Teasley after your former athletics director, and according to my sources, the president of the university strongly urged you to move on, which at one point he was hiring Sean Elliott. And then he changed his mind. And Lonnie Teasley brought in a bunch of duds out of the transfer portal, and you had no offensive tackles in 2023, and Spencer Rattler had to run for his life. Okay? And you went 5-7. Then you hired Dow Loggins, which was a much maligned hire. And I have to admit, you know, that first year he struggled, but it really wasn't his fault. I mean, Spencer Rattler put up great numbers. He got drafted. He's been a starting quarterback in the National Football League. Xavier Legette was a first-round draft pick. You wasted them. Then last year, you had a great defense. You went out and recruited pros like Kyle Kennard, like Demetrius Knight, Torricelli Simpkins. And you're 3-3. You win 6 in a row. You're the hottest team in the country. You beat Missouri. You beat top 10 Texas A&M. You beat Clemson. And you're sitting right there for the college football playoff. And then this year, once again, it's 1 step forward and 2 steps back. But now you don't have an AD that's really invested in you. You have a new AD who's got a $350 million stadium project to sell. He's going to have another one to sell when they add suites to one of the end zones. And you've got that battery type project around Williams-Brice Stadium that's coming. And South Carolina, how hot is Shane Beamer's seat? And if they have 2 more bad losses, do you go ahead and cut ties with him and have your coach ready to bring in the Monday after the Clemson game? Because there's going to be mass portal defections. There's going to be decommitments, and either way. And do we really trust Shane Beamer to make what's essentially his 3rd offensive coordinator hire in the last 4 years? And who can he get coming off a 4-8 season?
Yeah, I think that my opinion on this is probably a little bit softer than most, and I'll admit to that. I'm definitely somebody who I give people the benefit of the doubt a lot, and I understand in this business it's nearly impossible to operate that way, and I'll admit to that. But I think that here's my take on it right now is if Shane Beamer does not fire Mike Shula, my opinions change drastically. If he admits that he made the wrong call and he cuts ties with him, I personally, at this point, who would call the plays other than Shula right now, where we think it'll make it a night and day difference? I mean, we even saw with Sean Elliott, it still took 2 weeks for the pre-snap penalties to sort of like actually die down. The amount of protection and sacks and everything. I just think that right now it's unrealistic to assume that Shane would cut ties with Shula before the season ends. So my thoughts are, if he doesn't understand that Shula needs to go, then that's where things are worrisome to me. I think that it's really easy to want coaches fired. I think it's really fair a lot of the time. And I think that you have to, so I see a lot of South Carolina fans that are sort of comparing the whole like, oh, LSU wasn't okay with, just kind of being mediocre, and they got rid of Brian Kelly, who won like 74% of the games. And I'm sorry, but the amount of money LSU football has compared to South Carolina, and the amount of just name branded, like South Carolina and LSU aren't the same. The expectations aren't the same right now. And I'm sorry, but that would be unfair to Beamer to hold him to the same standard as an LSU coach at the moment. I think that it's a difficult year, and I think that South Carolina is not the only sport. Football is not the only sport going through this. I think it's a difficult year with rev share. Everyone's getting used to this. And these aren't me making excuses for Beamer. This is me explaining that any coach walking into the situation at South Carolina right now would struggle just a little bit. It's a whole new world. The amount of athletes who want money and don't want certain experiences that they did like 5 months ago, let alone a year ago, like dynamics are shifting. I think that South Carolina, Donati, everyone's working through that. Would it be the most, the smartest decision or the most financially responsible decision to get rid of Beamer, right, after this year, if they don't pick up more than one more win? Like, I don't know. You have to look at the dynamics at play, and you also have to acknowledge the fact that when there are a lot of head coach openings in the SEC especially, and in the FBS, like, South Carolina might not be the most attractive position. And do you want to take a risk at maybe a mediocre hire and pay a buyout when you don't know if you're getting an improvement from Shane Beamer? Or do you want to sit down with Shane Beamer and say, I'm in charge of who you're hiring as your next offensive coordinator. These are the expectations for this year. Yes, your seat is hot going into 2026 if things don't change. I think that loyalty is a difficult thing. And I think that Shane is the nicest guy in the world, and obviously has a hard time because Shula was somebody that did a lot of good for the program last year, and it made sense to elevate him. But in my eyes, the like kind of harsh take I'll stand on, which is not harsh compared to what some other people are saying, is like, I think it was a missed opportunity to not even interview anyone else for the offensive coordinator position. And I think that Shane should have recognized how many people in America would want to call plays for Lenora Sellers, how many people in America could call plays for Lenora Sellers in the college style offense. And I think that I at the time, I'll admit, I was like, heck yeah, continuity. I got what he was saying. I understood. I was like, Shula did a lot of good last year. He knows Lenoris, but unfortunately, sometimes you take a swing and you miss. And I think that this was one of those instances. And I think that regardless if Sellers goes to the draft or not, like, there has to be an expectation of like, act like South Carolina's an offense and a system that anyone is going to want to, die for the opportunity to work with, and really consider who you can get in that regard, because it unfortunately just has not lived up to expectations this year. So that was a really long-winded way of saying I don't think Beamer should be fired after this year. I do think that he has the right approach to Columbia. He has the right mentality. I think he's really, really good at recruiting, regardless of what the numbers and stats say. And I think that, hey, I know everyone's kind of making fun of like, oh, culture of love isn't working, but I can guarantee you, like, if Beamer was fired on Friday, players would be coming out being upset and not coming out posting videos of them like subtly celebrating, as some LSU players have. So I think that says a lot, regardless of everyone, donors, fans, coaches, everyone's focused on winning. And I get that. I respect that. But if we're talking about recruiting in a time where people only really care about money and recruiting's getting harder, I don't think cutting ties with a person like Beamer right now is the right decision.
All right, great stuff. And I agree with a good bit of that. I do think Shane Beamer has done a lot of good, but do we really, after over 4.5 years or 5 years, if he gets another year, do we trust him to keep his emotions in check? I would feel much better about bringing him back if Jeremiah Donati was basically telling him and making the hires for him. I don't trust him to make a hire. I think he's insecure and he is afraid to hire anybody with a bigger name than him. You can say Mike Shula and Joe D have bigger names than him, but they're both in their 60s and they're on their last leg. And regardless, I know for a fact Mike Shula will not call another game after the Clemson game. He's out regardless. I mean, even my 12-year-old daughter knows that. And by the way, she's pretty smart. National Honor Society in elementary school and a 93 average. Her first report card, I got to brag on my girl. But I don't trust him to make hires. I don't trust him to make important in-game decisions because he is ruled by his emotions. And if he would have done the logical thing on Saturday, South Carolina would have a shot going into their last two games of legitimately salvaging a 6-6 season and making a bowl game. And on Mike Shula, honestly, Davis Cutter is the son of Dirk Cutter, who is an offensive guru, and who Davis Cutter, by the way, spent the last 2 years at Texas with Steve Sarkisian. And I would even say Mike Furry and Sean Elliott divvy it up. It couldn't be any worse than Mike Shula. And I just think Mike Shula has destroyed the freedom of that Lenora Sellers felt last year under Dowell Loggins. I think he has felt like a prisoner of the pocket all season long.
Yeah, I mean, I do disagree on the emotional sense. And I also try to be aware that, like, when I'm reporting, when I'm covering these teams, like, it's really easy to assume from the outside when I'm not in this situation that what I think or what I know or what I believe would be the right answer. And, like, I say all the time, like, I would not know. I mean, these are high pressure situations and it's exactly what everyone signed up for. Like, I'm not making excuses for anyone, but you look at any coach and they have different ways. I mean, Brian Kelly was caught like cursing out 5 different people last weekend, but you know, when he wins, it's fine. But I just think that, like, when Shane's passionate, people are okay with it. But then when he's losing, it's sort of like negative. And I think that I mean, I have not been here long enough to really know the in-depth, you know, details of why he hired who and everything like that. But I think that this was a wake-up call of how college football is changing, of how things are changing and dynamics are at play. And I think that, like, truly you sometimes have to make really hard decisions. And I think, to be honest, I just, no one asked for, like, how I run my life. I acknowledge that, but I also feel like I'm a hypocrite if I'm critiquing Shane for, like, not cutting people off when I have a pretty bad inability to, like, cut people off, you know? And, like, again, that's, like, a weirdly annoying, lame personal answer, but it is the truth. Like, it's really hard to make really hard decisions sometimes. And so I do understand. I think it's genuine when he knew probably going, you know, that Lonnie and the offensive line was underperforming. I mean, South Carolina's quarterback has had the most sacks, I think either the second most or fourth most, you know, the last 3 or 4 seasons, like Rattler, Sellers, everyone, like, there's an issue. But it's when you believe that things go right and can improve, it's sort of like a hill that sometimes you get stuck dying on. And I think that that's happened with some of these hires or lack of firings, is just that, you know, I don't want to say last year was like a false sense of hope, but when all of a sudden you pick up the most wins you've ever had as a coach, you're like, okay, things are going to be okay. And you don't always make changes when things are good. And then when they drastically turn worse, that's when you have to make the tough calls.
I think the last 4 seasons, South Carolina's quarterbacks have been sacked more than any other team in the Southeastern Conference. All right, so let's talk about somebody that does know how to make high-pressure decisions, and somebody that's not ruled by their emotions, and somebody that understands time and score situations, and who is a 3-time national championship coach, and that is Dawn Staley. You got your first look at them against Anderson on Friday. Obviously, Anderson's tallest player was 6 foot tall. Gamecocks 5 players in double figures. All 10 players score at least 5 points. Joyce Edwards doing Joyce Edwards things, but more things, expanding her game to the 3-point line, which I think we both had expectations of that. 27 points on 9 of 13 from her, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and 6'6" Medina Okot. I think 17 points, 15 rebounds for her. Freshman Agot McKeer, 16 points on 5 of 9 from the field, 6 of 6 from the free throw line. Your first impressions of this team, Tanai Latson, 14 points. Just your thoughts overall.
Yeah. I mean, I think that obviously the level of talent that they're playing against plays a role, but I was very impressed with how every group that Dawn put out there seemingly worked together. And I think that's a huge thing this year. She doesn't have a ton of depth. Chloe Kitts is gone. She's out all year. You have 10 players to start the year. Staying healthy matters more than ever, but especially with the fact that the bench players averaged a combined 4.4 minutes last year. 2 are freshmen, they averaged none. And then you have players coming off the bench that really weren't tasked with a lot last year. And that's okay. It has to be a big leap, but I really like what I saw. Medina is just fascinating to watch. She gets down the floor so fast for a 6'6", really strong center. I don't want to sit here and say I was worried about Joyce, but obviously Joyce had some trouble in the NCAA tournament, and it sort of felt like she was, 1, in her head, but 2, people had kind of figured out her spin move. And I'm not sitting here to say she was one-dimensional, but it just was one of those things where you're like, she can't lean on what she knows best right now, and that's seemingly really taking her out of rhythm. But I was really impressed with what I saw from her both on offense and defense. I think her defense needs to take a big leap this year as well, but especially just the creativity in her offense, how she was creating her own shot, but also finding others and working well in the system offense. The 27 points, regardless of the talent, they had to come some way. She had a defender on her at all times and was still able to create. So I was really impressed. I'm curious to see how obviously tough competitions out there. It's going to be a difficult season. I think there'll be some early tests, USC, Southern Cal in November. And then obviously either like Texas, UCLA, Duke, that kind of round robin over Thanksgiving. But I like what I saw so far, and I'm looking forward to what we see tomorrow in Atlanta as well.
So I'm really surprised. I guess that game is not going to be televised. I thought for sure, with it being a men's, women's doubleheader, that it would be televised, but I do think we'll get a better sense. That should be obviously a much more competitive game, but, just what did you see from Agot McKeer, from Isla McDowell, and obviously Medina Okot, I think is the correct pronunciation. And a slim down, completely different looking Adele Tack, who looks like, and she's 6'6" as well. It looks like she, could provide some solid minutes there, maybe 10 to 15 minutes per game, but then, do you play double big like that when Joyce needs a blow? Does Miriam Dowda fill that role? Could you play Isla McDowell at the 4? And then I think Maddie McDaniel's poised to have a much bigger year this year. And I know Tessa, did not shoot the ball particularly well in that game, but I think this has got to be her year. And if it is, with Tanaya Latson and Tessa Johnson on the wings and Joyce Edwards and Medina Ocote out there, South Carolina could really be imposing, and I think a much better matchup for UCLA this year than last year.
Absolutely. I mean, South Carolina, I think a lot of people really thought that, like, I mean, the score against UCLA, I don't think accurately represented like the talent that was going, that was facing off in that game. And I think that, exactly to your point, like, they just lacked height in the paint, and then they caught them on a game that, like, South Carolina's offense was underperforming up until that point, and you kind of saw the writing on the wall there that, like, hey, this is probably going to be a game that they're dropping because it's their first good team that they're facing, that they can't go 10 minutes without scoring more than 5 points like they did against Clemson a week earlier, or even like a few days earlier. I'm really high on Agat so far. I really, really like what she brings. And I think that Dawn is lucky with these two freshmen, because I do think that they can play a guard forward kind of mix matched role. And I think obviously, like with Tessa too, I mean, in my eyes, she can play the 1 through 4. And so I think Dawn has flexibility with lineups, and that will particularly be really helpful right now. One, as she's sorting through, okay, who works with who, but also just foul trouble, injuries, anything with these 10 players, is that I think she can move those 3 around a lot. And like you said, I think Maddie McDaniel is absolutely poised to kind of have the same level of control that Raven Johnson brings. I will absolutely die on the hill that the consistency of control and the defense and the IQ and the passing that Raven has, that it's hard when she's not on the floor. I know everyone wants to critique her offense or her shooting, but when she's off the floor, the next point guard really needs to know how to calm down an offense and have her, Raven's a very intelligent basketball player, and I think Maddie is making that leap and can fill that kind of void when Raven needs a break, and that's huge. And then obviously the height in the paint, Adele Tack and Miriam Dowda, if they have sort of these breakout years like they're kind of on pace to and been talked about having, it could be really, really special. And they're all great people to root for. And of course I'm biased because I cover them, so I see, but the work is there. The difference in seeing how they performed in April versus just the snippets of practice I've seen so far, it seems like a lot of people are making really big leaps, which is what Dawn needs right now.
All right, so last question, because I know we got to get you out to go to coordinators media. Recruiting. South Carolina lands 6'4" post player Kelsey Andrews, veteran of Team USA, but also somebody who's had a history of knee injury. She just had her 3rd knee injury. She has had both ACLs reconstructed. This one was a meniscus. Obviously, depending on the level, that could impact her. But her head coach at IMG Academy, who's coached a lot of big-time players, thinks she is the best post player in the country in her class. Certainly a big need, especially if Medina does not get another year. I don't know how the NCAA can count her time at the University of Kenya on her NCAA clock when they don't participate in NCAA sports. But South Carolina hosted Kaylee Wynn, a 6'2", post player or a wing player from Mater Dei High School, number 17 in the country by ESPN. Jersey Robinson and her evidently very good friends. Jersey Robinson, a 6-foot point guard from California and of Samoan descent, just like Tahina Paopao. South Carolina could have had Okafor, the point guard from Spain, by way of Kenya, I believe, or I'm sorry, Nigeria. But then UCLA offered her $400,000 in NIL money, and South Carolina said, no, we're saving our money for Jersey Robinson and Kaylee Wynn. Kaylee Wynn came back with Jersey Robinson. They were there on the sideline with Asia Wilson. It was Jersey Robinson's final official visit at South Carolina and Stanford for Kaylee Wynn, at South Carolina and LSU for Jersey Robinson. And I think both these players are trending heavily towards South Carolina because now LSU, they don't have a full-time president anymore. Their guy's going to Rutgers. We don't know if their AD is going to be around because now he's got a Jimbo Fisher hire and buyout at Texas A&M around his neck, as well as Brian Kelly. I don't know that they're going to have the NIL, and South Carolina definitely has more playing time. I think they're trending to land Jersey Robinson and Kaylee Wynn, and this would be two huge wins for Dawn Staley because it's probably a top 3 recruiting class, and you conquer the last frontier, which was California high school players. You had not signed a player from California out of high school. You added a couple in the transfer portal. Your thoughts on Jersey Robinson and Kylie Wynn?
Yeah, I also believe that at least Jersey is trending towards the South Carolina direction. That's just what I've been told. Obviously, minds can change and decisions are, they change at last minute, especially with something as big as this. It would be 2 huge gets for South Carolina. I think that they would really introduce kind of this new era of Dawn Staley. She's losing a lot next year. And I think that, if we're operating under the assumption that Chloe returns, Ashlyn is back, you have Tessa, and then you sort of introduce this new wave of guards kind of as Tessa being the leader, I think could be really special. And I think that they're both incredibly talented players. And I think that especially getting someone, obviously, like, I know that people say like rankings don't matter, things like that, but obviously the number 5 recruit in the country is the number 5 recruit in the country for a reason. And I think that it would be very, very special. And it's hard to compete with NIL right now. A lot of schools can say that. And I think that obviously everyone around the world and us as journalists, we're seeing the repercussions of rev share and the impact it has on women's basketball, especially. And so when you're able to get anyone, it's big, honestly, to be transparent, because a lot of people are looking at things for what I'd argue are the wrong reasons. But some people, I can't sit here and tell someone that they shouldn't value money. That's everyone's individual decision. But obviously would be 2 huge gets for Dawn in a competitive environment.
Well, and you would add them with Maddie McDaniel. Joyce Edwards would be back. Like you said, I think Chloe should come back because she will miss the entire WNBA season in all likelihood. And you can't waste a first-round pick when the player's not going to play. But Agot McKeer was a top 5 player. Isla McDowell ended up being a top 15 player. Joyce Edwards was probably the number 2 player along with Sarah Strong. I mean, that would give you a really very talented core of players. And then there's still going to be the transfer portal, which Dawn Staley at SEC Media Days said, we do pretty good the second time around because they don't cost as much. And she's got plenty of playing time to sell. I mean, with Raven leaving, it's wide open for Jersey Robinson to start. Obviously she's going to compete with Maddie Mouse, who's one of my favorites. But there's plenty of minutes there. And Kaylee Wynn is a 6'2" knockdown shooter. Honestly, I feel great about both of these, but you got to get across the finish line. We'll see how it goes. But, that'd be back-to-back top 3 recruiting classes. And then Dawn Staley brought in the number 1 portal class in the country. Who's to say she can't do it again? And this is a Final Four contending team, which means you're, 1 game away from playing for a national championship if you get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that a lot of people are going to hit the portal after this year just because, again, it's like the first year of rev share. There's a lot at play.
A lot of over promising and under delivering.
Exactly.
I mean, a lot of the women's basketball experts expect the freshman class from this year and the freshman class from next year. There are going to be a lot of disappointed players when they get to school and the checks don't start rolling in like they were promised. Lulu Kesin, always great stuff. Love having you on. Safe travels to the Grove. Enjoy it and enjoy the food in the press box. I have a feeling that may be the only enjoyable part. And I don't think Shane will be in a very chipper mood in the locker room after the game. So
we'll see. We'll see.
Be well, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again down the road.
Sure.
Take care and enjoy Atlanta tomorrow.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Have a great weekend and a great holiday.
All right, you too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. All right, that was Lulu Kesin. Great show. Great to be back. We're back to normalcy around here. And so I'll have shows to finish the week and then Thursday and Friday, and then be back on Sunday for the morning after on Gamecock Pod Daily. Special thanks to Alex Jones, to Lulu Kesin, Craig in the chat, and everybody else. And Craig, I'm with you. Georgia Tech does not worry about running Haynes King. And I was basically standing up on a soapbox for Shane Beamer to hire Buster Faulkner. I think you have to run a college offense because you are in college. And I look at Vanderbilt, I look at Georgia Tech, I look at LSU, I look at what Texas A&M is doing. I look Ole Miss, Mississippi State. South Carolina's offense looks prehistoric compared to almost any offense on any even above average college program. Changes have to be made. We'll see what happens. We'll be back next Wednesday for another Gamecock Pod Live. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, Keith Alsep saying God bless, go Gamecocks, and thank goodness it's women's basketball season. I'm out of here.